and welcome to Zion's Finest. This is episode 80, and this is JK. I am joined by Kenny's brother, Samuel K. Sweeten.
Hello, hello. How's everyone doing?
We're doing good. I hope everyone's doing good out there. Drew is somewhere out in the universe saying, not a JK episode, and that's fine. Today we're going to do something. We're testing these box videos. We're testing unboxing videos, not unboxing videos, but box reviews, kind of. We're obviously doing this on YouTube again. This is our second chance. We're going to go through this. Top of the discussion, we're going to say Adepticon is the end of the month. We're getting excited for that. Next week, the local Utahns have their 3 Mirror event. If you are in the area and you haven't signed up for it, let us know. I think we might be at capacity, but obviously we'd love to see everyone there. That's up at the Queen's Realm. And now let's just get into it. We're going to do something a little bit different in terms of how we're structuring this. We are talking about the Cassian box, which is Cassian, K2, and Rebel Pathfinders. This is obviously one half of the Rogue One box. We're going to get more of it later, which I think is going to come into play. It's a 954 with 2 Force, and Cassian's your primary. We're going to go through all of their abilities together this time. Then we're going to talk about the trees, and then we're going to talk about fits and fixes, why we want to play these, where it's going to go, how it's going to lead. First off, we've got Cassian. He has got a lot of really cool abilities and a lot of different things to do. He has 10 stamina, which is really good. But let's kick it over to Sam. Sam, talk about what makes Cassian interesting.
I think the big thing for me is his identity being this new type of revenge trigger where he gets to move anybody on the board when one of his allies gets wounded. And if it's a spy, he gets to reposition that ally. It's a massive, massive deal. It makes wounding against a Cassian list a real chore, because it's going to be real easy for the Cassian player to have somebody that can get to a point and stop a flip or steal a point. And I think that ability is going to be his bread and butter. That's going to be why you're going to bring him. The rest of the identity, I think, is just kind of flavor text. It's good, the impact and sharpshooter, but that's not why you're playing Cassian. It's going to come up. It's going to be cool. And his other abilities are pretty standard. He has some extra movement, some chip damage, some ways to get extra dice. Cool stuff, but you're really bringing him for that identity.
Yeah, the impact, the sharpshooter, is going to turn out every once in a while. But yeah, that idea of repositioning a spy after your team gets wounded, which is, yeah, because you're spread out. If I'm assuming that Rogue One has spies, the other Rogue One box will have spies as well. The other things we need to blend in is that out of activation push. It's interesting because it costs the Force. We'll talk a little bit more about Force usage as we go through, because it is a 2 Force box, and there's a lot of Force being used. Cassian is super interesting. He gets more interesting with his tree, I think, but that make 10 men feel like 100 ability, just it's going to change the way you have to think about everything, because it used to be a single figures moving. Now it's anyone across the board.
We all know how good Mando's identity is, but now Andor can give that to literally anyone. The spies are the ones who get repositioned, but you can advance any character. It's wild. It's going to be awesome, and I'm excited to see it hit the table and how it interacts with the game as a whole.
Yeah. You think about, for instance, those round 1 aces on Inferno Squad, where any of Inferno Squad rolls up and the first thing they do is step up and just snipe you. Well, now they snipe you on one half, and the other half gets sent up. The other side of the board gets sent up with a redirection, with a reposition. It's crazy stuff. The potential is there. The issue is that 2 Force. We'll talk about that more again. The next step in there, we're going to go right to the secondary. We're going to clip a little bit faster in this. There's a lot more discussion out there. We've talked about this a lot in the Slack, but we're going to talk about K2. K2SO, Outspoken Enforcer. He is a 5-point secondary. We've actually been seeing a lot of these guys lately, these 5-point secondaries, and he is pure stat-wise pretty well up there. And I'm just going to kick it back to Sam to talk about his different abilities, because he has a ton of different stuff. I think there's some that are specifically more interesting, but Sam, take it away for a second.
So I think K2SO is going to be a really interesting character, and he plays both into Andor's themes of having revenge as a key part of his kit, but also being very force intensive. So you get powerful abilities, but you're not going to be able to do them all. It's a really interesting tension. He has pretty standard movement abilities. He can move someone else, or he can move himself. But the big deal is his kind of combined revenge triggers. He has one that you can pay a force for. That's when somebody else gets wounded, dash and attack. But I think goodbye is the really interesting part where you wound him, going to give you a condition, and he's going to dash a friendly spy. And then if it's end game and you're just trying to accelerate scoring, you can move the struggle tracker for the cost of some momentum. And moving the struggle tracker is better than momentum. At least from my experience, if you have the choice between, okay, I can wound somebody to score 1 momentum, or take an objective in order to move the struggle tracker, you always take the objective and move the struggle tracker. Even though it's kind of 1 for 1, you're going to be positive points-wise if you choose to blow him up late game. And wounding him, especially when combined with Cassian's identity, it's going to be so awful. You're going to wound him. You're going to get a condition. Cassian's going to advance somebody or reposition a spy. And K2SO is going to dash another spy.
And that is assuming also that his congratulations, you are being rescued doesn't go off. Because also somewhere in there, I don't really know how the timing works, but wounding a different Rebel Alliance figure is gonna, again, move someone else. Killing someone in this list is going to cause a big chain reaction of things are going to be happening.
It feels thematic for Rogue One. They know people are going to go down, but when they go down, everyone else is spurred on to complete their objective before they all die, right? And so you're getting a lot of that here. These people will go down. It's not like they have crazy defensive tech, but once they do, everyone else is going to pile on, accomplish that objective, stop you from scoring.
Yep. His big downside is that the revenge trigger costs a force, his out of activation costs a force. So now we're at 3 force, and Cassian brings 2. Again, I know I've hit that to the ground a little bit. And the next people, we're going to go into the Rebel Pathfinders. They are the 4-cost generic secondary that is in the Rogue One box. They have a very standard kit in terms of what a 4-cost secondary is. Defensive maneuver, they get camouflage to start, which gives them a hunker to start, and they have an ability where they get advance instead of dash when they have it. But Sam, let's talk about their one big ability that is different than everything else is Cloak and Dagger. Will you talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, Cloak and Dagger is a really interesting ability, and it asks a really interesting question, I think, which is, are you willing to give up a full attack action for 3 extra dice when attacking a primary? And I think often the math will say yes, just because primaries have increased defensive stats. So you are likely to get more total results against them by adding 3 dice instead of shooting 6 dice at them twice. That's going to be especially true against very defensive targets like the Mandalorian. But it's not always going to be true. It's going to be a very skill testing ability to be like, when do I really need to get this one attack through? And when is the math actually good for me? Because sometimes it's not going to be. Maybe you're attacking someone slightly squishier, like Padme or Leia. It's an interesting question that it asks. And I think that this ability is going to be an interesting tool in their kit. Something else that I'm actually think is going to be very impactful for them is the fact that they have scale, which means on all these out of activation movements that you give on revenge triggers, or through Cassian or K2SO, or through their defensive expertise tree, they can choose to climb, which is a really interesting way to mess with how your opponent is scoring points and can help you get additional pressure on objectives that you couldn't before. I think they're a really interesting unit, and I'm excited to get them on the board because of that and see how they play.
Yeah, I think we need to feel them out a little bit. Again, I know I came back to this earlier, but they have their 2 abilities, both cost force, and they only have 2 force in this list. And so really balancing this all out, I think defensive maneuver, unless you need to get somewhere, you probably just don't take it that often. I might be wrong on that, but I think you kind of just have to let it not go.
Yeah, there's some really interesting play patterns here, and I think it really depends on where you want to be spending your force. You could theoretically do something like take cover, spend force for defensive maneuver, you get your full advance, or climb because they have scale. and then you still have another action. So you could do something like that if you want to be more action efficient. You can just ignore that force cost and say, I'm never going to defensive maneuver, or hey, I don't care about attacking primaries, I'm never going to cloak and dagger. It's going to be really skill testing, but also I think very rewarding to players to figure out how to best spend that force. And even though you have very powerful effects when you become wounded, once these guys get wounded, it's going to be really hard on your force economy in order to be able to do things.
All right, now let's talk about the trees, what they're going for. Cassian's trees, light it up all the way. What are you seeing? Why do you like one over the other? Take over.
Yeah, I think I see a range tree and a melee tree going on here, and kind of a damage and control tree at the same time. Lighted up being range 5 is, compared to all the way being range 4, is very interesting to me. That this stance has greater range is just an interesting dynamic to play with. It's going to come up. Sometimes you're only going to have that range 5. You're going to have to be on that side. The fact that it doesn't have a shove until 4 means you're really relying on blowing stuff up. So lighted up feels to me like this is the side that you're trying to finish off stuff from range. Or if you've shatter pointed Cassian and you're getting the sharpshooter dice, seems great to be on this side. Or if there's somebody engaged with his target so he can do some damage and get some extra dice, because he's going to want as many dice as he can to hit the late control that he has in this tree, because those shoves are very late on 4 and 5. So bunch of front up damage, late control. I think you're only going to want to be in the stance to finish people up, or if you can get those extra dice from his identity or the chip damage. I think all the way is going to be where he lives most of the time. It's slightly worse defensively because it doesn't have crit mitigation, but it has recovers, which is really big for getting rid of those strains and those pins. And it's better in melee. So if you're going to make a melee attack, you're going to want to be in the stance. Shoves on 2 and 3 are great. You have an early disarm, and your repositions a little sooner on this tree for the extra movement. I think most of the time you're going to see Cassians in all the way. Lighted up is not one of those stances that is completely ignored, right? So he has 2 usable stances, just 1 preferred stance is my general take.
Yeah, I agree with you basically completely. The one issue with all the way is that expertise, the strike to a crit expertise is just a thing. Like, it's good, always, crits are always good, but obviously Lighted Ups has a crit and a hit to a crit on one. But yeah, I think all the way is just the better one.
Yeah.
Let's jump. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say you're totally right that range expertise, I don't love it.
Yeah, and it happens. The game is built on balance and twisting things back and forth, and that's totally fine. Next, we're going to look at K2s. K2s is a lot more interesting. Tons of defensive expertise. But Sam, what do you see here? What do you like? What do you not like?
Really like that he has shoves on 1 and 2. That is awesome. I don't love that it's only a shove on 1, so you don't get anything else. You either have to take the 2 damage or the shove. But still, I think this is a super interesting tree. You have both damage and control to start with, and then you have the option of a couple different conditions. On both offense and defense, he has really interesting expertise. The ranged expertise, I think, is slightly better for getting extra results, because your 2 is slightly better. But if you need to push through damage, that extra damage on the expertise from melee is super interesting. Range 4 is, we would always prefer that to be range 5, but range 4 is fine. It may mean that he really has to spend force for that extra movement sometimes, which is going to be tough. And then, as you said, I do really like his defensive expertise. He's going to feel sturdy.
He has small things here and there, but both the offensive expertises are really good, and the defensive expertise, I think, is really, really good. One expertise turning into a block and that crit mitigation is a pretty good thing that's going to help people out quite a bit.
Yeah, he's going to be tough to take down, and when you do, he's going to be super punishing to take down. Also, you compare that with Lockdown, with the crit mitigation, it's going to make him slightly harder to push off points, and you have good out of activation movement in this box, which is going to be a really, I think, annoying piece to deal with for your opponents.
I do like on 3, you have push, pin. I think whenever you can push, pin, those combinations are there. But yeah, having 3 steps being 2 damage, push, pin is less than great, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to jump into the Pathfinders. The Pathfinders, they are missing their push. I mean, not missing, but their pushes on 3. The funny thing is we talked about Cloak and Dagger really ramping up into primaries, but they max at 6 with the condition that Cloak and Dagger does add possibility of 1 to 2 damage. But all in all, that's a pretty good range, and they're pretty good range offense value, defensive value. There's a lot of value in general in terms of the expertises. Sam, how do you feel? Do you think this accomplished what they needed to accomplish?
I am really of two minds on these guys. I think there's some really interesting dynamic things you can do with them, with the scale, with the advance instead of dash when they have a hunker token. But their tree leaves a lot to be desired to me. I look at this tree and it's 501st-esque, like no shove till 3. Your expertise is significantly better than the 501st. So you're going to be hitting that shove on 3 more often. But it's these guys' playmaking is going to be not on their turn, is what I think when I look at this tree. If they're going to make a play, it's going to be through Cloak and Dagger hitting a primary once. If they're just doing 2 attacks, I don't think it's going to do too much. And I think most of their value is going to be by, hey, here's some highly maneuverable, relatively defensive. That defense expertise is quite good. Reposition on 3 is great, especially with scale, so it can be a climb or a reposition. There's
and
a lot of
often be hunkered.
And they'll often be hunkered, right? So they're going to be rolling 5 or 6 dice at range, plus their 5 on melee. They're going to be pretty defensive. I just don't think their tree excites me at all. It's really hard for me to evaluate these guys before I get them on the table. I could see them being really, really good. And I can also see them just falling flat because they end up being a dead activation because their tree is 4 with the shove on 3.
My fear is you're running you're running Cloak and Dagger. You roll whatever it is, 9 dice. You're 6 plus your 3, so you're rolling 9 dice. You could even focus them using Cassian and roll 12 dice for it, and you roll 5 expertise for the 2 crits. You roll 3 expertise for crit hit, and you don't even get the bonus damage from Cloak and Dagger on that crit. I feel like they should have given damage there. There is very high womp womp possibility for these guys that I agree. Could they be really good? Yes. I don't think there's a reason why they can't be really good. But if it is, it's just because they are going to have that low roll opportunity. Ironically, I think their low end tree of getting the expertise, the 2 strike expertise for 1 and 2, makes it so you don't want to use Cloak and Dagger because you're trying to get through to 3 damage push or 3 damage strain. But yeah, get them to the table. Let's see what they are. But that's trees. Now let's get into a little bit more meta chew conversations. Where exactly do these guys fit? Historically, 9 squad point primaries haven't been a huge rage. There are absolutely Cad Bane truthers. Armor made a big splash, but is not the greatness that we have seen in the past. Especially to force, there is a lot of things that have been falling out of we need more force, we need more this, we need more that, and exactly where they fit is a pretty good question. I think Cassian is a really, really good primary. I think his abilities are going to make people think. I think his stances are good. His defense is good enough. He is strong enough with his stamina. He has a lot of things going for him. I think K2 has a chance to be really, really good. His problem is he's force hungry, and just like Cassian, they only have the 2 force. We're coming back to that, and it just keeps coming back to we have 2 force. The Pathfinders are a question mark. They are worse than the Commandos. I just kind of throwing that out there. They do not have infiltrate. They don't have quite the spike ability as Commandos. They don't get the focus on the advance, and they are more defensive, but they are just missing a little bit of something that is going to make them really, really good. I think they're probably still one of the better Rebel 4-cost supports, but there's still a lot to be seen with them. So Sam, again, you kind of seem to think that K2 is going to be good, like I just talked about. Rebel Pathfinders, they're not as good as Commandos, but they still probably have something. Cassian, I think, stats-wise, is a really good primary. Where do you think he stacks up in terms of the 9 SP 2 force primaries?
So I think he's the best one currently. I have been on the record that I don't think Cad Bane is a particularly competitive model, even though I think he's a very interesting design. I think Krennic is going to be super interesting, and he does some really cool stuff. However, I think that Cassian's identity is just good enough to be top of the class for the 9-2s. The problem is always going to be the force economy. And I think how much Cassian we see is really going to depend on how well can we solve that problem. How well can we manage that force economy? What pairings make that force work? Because that identity is just bonkers. It's going to win games. It's going to be a thorn in people's sides. It's just incredible, really. So that's where I am with him. He has the raw power level to be good. The question is, does that make up for the 2 force? And I think so, but I think it's going to require specific lists.
Yeah, I talked about how I thought once upon a time that Jin, the other half of Rogue One, would have some kind of force fixing, be that refresh, or I actually said that I think they should have an ability called Hope, or rebellions are built on hope. And basically, as you get wounded, you're kind of getting the Kiadi-Mundi force discount. Obviously, I know nothing. I have no inside information, but that seems like it would make sense in terms of how things get fixed in terms of force distribution. But ultimately, yeah, I agree. Cassian, I think, is the best. Armor made a big splash, but they have that force fixing, and Mandos were just solid all across the board. Do you think this fixes anything in the meta? Do you think that it can do enough? I don't think anything can do enough against Inferno, but do you think anything gets fixed by Cassian entering?
If anything fixes the matchup against Inferno, I do think it's these guys, just because the wild flexibility of the revenge trigger. I don't think it's going to be the answer, but we've seen revenge be the thing you do to get the best possible matchup, and this revenge trigger is just so flexible that I think it perhaps could be an upgrade to our existing revenge options. But as far as just straight up fixing anything, I think it really plays in the same design space as a lot of other rebels, as Kanan, as Charming Princess Leia. Kind of this revenge thing going on, same place as Mando. So I'm not sure that it's a fix, more so maybe an upgrade that can bring these type of lists more to the forefront, even though they are sitting, at the top of the meta anyways. But it's an interesting place to see where they will fit, and I don't think it's going to make any new archetypes. I think it's just going to better existing ones.
I feel that. Yeah, it's the ability of dashing someone from across the board into where you need to get them into position after someone else gets killed. It just is going to shove all math into a different world. Let's talk about
One thought on those lines, JK. I think what it may do, if this ends up being really good into Inferno Squad, which it might, then what it'll do is it'll force, I think, more control-based lists. So you will need lists that are good at displacement and locking down with conditions over damage, which Inferno Squad can do conditions, but isn't incredible at displacement. They're fine at it. So it could create this almost rock, paper, scissors gameplay. I don't think it's going to be quite that simplistic, where you have aggro, you have revenge, you have control. We've talked about these things before, and we've never really seen them actually play out. But that's just something to kind of keep in mind, that if this ends up being really strong, I think control-based force push stuff is going to be the way to deal with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There's a lot of possible things to go on from that. Yeah, that three-legged stool dynamic that hopefully becomes about. I have nothing against Inferno Squad. I think Inferno Squad is actually really fun to play. It's really fun to see. They're just a little bit overtuned. In terms of list building, there's a lot of different lists I think is going to go into this. One is obviously going to be Jin whenever it comes out. I think that pairing Cassian with Fulcrum, with Ahsoka 3, that just got spoiled, I should say, is going to be a big one, just because it gives 6 force. It creates a different pressure. She is up front. She's going to push into things. You would be able to bring any number of 4-cost secondary supports. There's a whole bunch of different things that work out. And because she's a rebel, she benefits from Cassian a little bit more than anyone else, or as good as anyone else, even if she can't add anything else to it. Other than Ahsoka 3, Fulcrum, do you have any thoughts on what you want to run with this in terms of lists? Again, we just talked about Jin being the other possibility, but until that's actually spoiled, actually out there, are there any other things that you'd love to run this with?
I do think Fulcrum is going to be the initial place to start. As you talked about, that force refresh, 4 force is really big. I think some other interesting places to pair this box are going to be with Charming Leia, where she's going to be able to advance Rebel Pathfinders and give you the ability to stack those revenge triggers. I think that there could be some interesting things with Kanan, where you play him more so on his Sorisu side, so you get that force refresh as well, which could really help this box. And you're leaning more into Kanan being that a force battery for you instead of being the key to the list and kind of make Andor the primary synergy piece that you're building around. I think that's something that I want to explore. I'm not sure that that's going to be the best possible list, but I'm excited to see how those can mesh together.
That Kanan idea is really interesting, especially just because no one ever leads him out of pack leader or whatever that ability is called. But I really like that idea as a whole. I am interested to see where it is. All right, let's talk about it. Your general emotion, splash, ripple, thud. Where do you think this lands?
I think Cassian is going to be a splash. I think his identity is that good. I'm not sure about the rest of his box. I think K2SO is good, but fives are always hard. I'm going to be conservative a bit here with the ripple. He's going to find lists, he's going to have homes, but he's not going to take over. He's not going to be the thing that takes over the meta. If this box is really good, I think it's going to be on the back of Cassian, and he's going to be the one that people are talking about. And I think Pathfinders are a ripple. I think their floor is relatively high because they're a 2-body support in Rebels. That's just going to go a long way at 4 points. And I don't see them hitting the Commandos level of splash. So I think Ripple's pretty safe for them. What about your thoughts, JK? Where do you see them landing?
That's where I tend to agree as a whole. I think as a box, I put it in Ripple for now. I think Jin can slide it up. The thing is, I guess I should parse this a little bit. With Armor is 9-2, and she made a huge impact, partially because a lot of things around her were very good, and shenanigans were shenanigans. I agree with K2. I don't know if he is stapled to Cassian, but just the fact that, I mean, he's built, they're kind of built to be together a little bit. Obviously, that's the whole point of boxes, right?
Yeah.
Cassian is everything. If Cassian's identity is as good as it smells, it's going to make a splash as a whole. I'm going to play a little conservative. I'm going to call the box a ripple, partly just because there's a lot of stuff still coming right now that I think can add and subtract. I think 2 Force, while Moff Gideon is still very much in play, means that you have to not reserve anything. And if Rebel Pathfinders don't actually hit that roof, that means you have a dead activation that you can't reserve, you can't push it anywhere else. And there's a little bit of fear into me. I think there is a high ceiling in terms of what could be. I'm going to check myself and call this a ripple and wait until Jin comes out and then go back and re-edit this to erase that and say splash. But I do think that also Cassian at 9 leaves you open for possible bounty hunter things that I think we still haven't fully explored. That could really be interesting. I realize that you could actually make an Oops All Bounties where you have every single one of those bounty secondaries actually in play with playable characters, with playable primaries, and you're not trying to force things, you're just existing with bounties. But I also, if a new player came in, I'm not going to be like, go get Cassian right now, I think he's going to be super good. I am going to be a little bit more muted and hold off. But you also are saying splash, so that means I'm going to be wrong, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
Well, JK, I don't think you're very wrong here at all. It's interesting where I think Cassian himself will be a splash, but I'm not sure about the rest of his box. So it's kind of a weird, I think he is a splash character, but because of the weakness of the rest of his box, I think you're very right in saying the box tends, not weakness, but the general power of the rest of his box tends towards ripple. So I think calling the box as a whole a ripple is quite accurate. I think that if he's going to make a splash, it's going to be alongside Fulcrum. It's going to be alongside Kanan replacing Pathfinders with Spectre, and you have Commandos. And then you have, something going on in that same revenge thing. So I don't think you're very far off at all. And I've been wrong before. I could definitely see this just ending up being a ripple. I do think it won't be a thud. I'm pretty confident in that.
I agree. I think you need to know what Cassian can do if you pull up to a premiere event. Once he launches, you can't just ignore him and assume he's going to go away. He is going to do things, and realistically, he's not bound into Rebels is the thing that actually makes him interesting, that makes him a Splash as much as anything. Yes, there are things about him that elevates Rebels, but he's not himself bound to be only 9 points with 9 points of Rebel underneath him. He can fit in a lot of different places that as the game keeps going, he's going to be better and better.
Yeah, I think he's going to be super interesting with that. Super interesting to list build. His identity not being keyed to tags is really cool. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you can play with him, and I'm excited to see what he does when he comes out and how he affects the meta, because I think he will.
Yep. All right. Final thoughts?
I'm just super excited to play this box. Think he's going to be good. That's really wrapping it up. Excited to see how Jin plays in with it all, because Rebels feels like it's a faction of sub-factions. And so once we see the entire Rogue One sub-faction, I think that's going to be really exciting to see how that works.
Yep. There's a lot of possibilities with him. And even though I was at the end I don't want to say I'm even skeptical. I think there's a lot of good pieces in there. I think this absolutely has a place in the meta. It has a place to explore. And I think players who are really good at thinking different ways, people who are good with like Han, for instance, have a chance to be good with Cassian, because I think he just does better things than Han in these kind of weird ways. And there's just a lot. It seems fun, and really, it should be fun. But Sam, thank you for joining us. Everyone, thank you for listening. We're going to do another one of these fairly soon, because Krennic just came out, and we have a whole bunch to talk about with him. Speaking of 9-2s, but please join the Slack. I know that Kenny has rewards and whatnot for joining it. Come tell us why we're wrong. We're not, but come tell us, and you'll make yourself look like a fool. But in the meantime, mahalo. Have a good night. Sam, thanks for coming.
Thanks, JK. Good to talk.
Good night, one and all. Thank you.